Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Erik Voss, and thank you for joining me wherever you are. Today, we're going to be talking about a little movie called Avengers Endgame. We're live streaming right now. I'm live, so if my sound sounds too loud, if it sounds too small, please let me know in the comments. I can see you all right now, and I appreciate all of you joining me for this live stream. Let's see, I see you, Ryan Whelan, Funny Mouse, Josh Brosh, Trevor Collins, Heriberto Perez, Scott D, Yuka Prieta, Crazy Lizard. You guys are the best. Thank you all so much for being part of this. So 4 years ago, Avengers Endgame came out into the world. It was technically April 26th was the release date, but it was the final Thursday of the month of April in 2019. So it was a very, very big time for all of us. I think we all remember our first viewing experience, or in some cases our second or third or fourth or fifth viewing experience. I, for one, saw it 5 times in its run in the movie theaters. I think I saw it 4 times in its original run, and then it re-released in August or September of 2019. And of course, this being my livelihood, I went to go see it again. So we're going to talk about this question that keeps coming up in the MCU, and as we look at all of Marvel films, is can Avengers Endgame ever be topped by Marvel? Was it Marvel's peak, looking back? And why is it compared to by all other films? Like recently, we've been seeing these promos for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I'm just going to continue to adjust the audio as I go, everybody. We've been seeing these promos for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and there are these, European critics who are saying it the best Marvel movie since Endgame. Why is it since Endgame? Why is it not since Spider-Man No Way Home? Because I think for a lot of people, No Way Home might have been a better movie. My ranking of the Marvel movies is a constantly shifting thing because I believe movies are a subjective experience through the eyes of one particular viewer and what they are going through in their lives at that moment, and their relationship with their world, with their loved ones, with their futures, their past and their present, and finally with this movie that they're sitting down in front of for 2.5 hours. So it's crazy to expect anyone to have a fixed ranking of any one particular film franchise or any films at all. I do categorize some films higher than others just because they mean more to me constantly in my life. But I do think that Avengers Endgame is at least in the top 10 of Marvel films, and we're going to talk about why that's the case. If you're new here, this is the Deep Dive channel. So it's part of the New Rockstars Network. It's a growing network that we have coming from the New Rockstars YouTube channel. I'm still part of the New Rockstars YouTube channel, but back in February, we spun off the second channel where I can do particular deep dives, live streams like this, but we're also in the midst of a rewatch of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, really just the first 2 movies. The first one of those came out last week, Volume 1. The second one will come out tomorrow on the channel. It's going to be a really, really good video, and I highly recommend you watch these, especially before going to see Volume 3. And then next week, May 5th, Friday, at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, I will be doing a live breakdown of the movie. I have not seen it yet. I'm able to see an early press screening tonight, but as of right now, I don't know what's going to be happening in Volume 3. I'm so excited for it. And I think, Volume 3 is going to be doing a lot of the things that Avengers Endgame attempted to do. I don't know if Volume 3 will be as successful or as beloved and revered as Avengers Endgame was, but I don't know if that's going to be the fault of Volume 3. Volume 3 may end up being a better singular movie than Avengers Endgame was. So let's look back at Avengers Endgame today, and the best way you can support the deep dive and the whole New Rockstars Digital Network is by checking out some merch options at nerdriot.shop. The shirt I'm wearing is a Rocket Science T 89P13. This is specifically part of the deep dive collection, so if you get one of these, it's one shirt that helps the deep dive directly, and I'm telling you right now, despite we've had a fortunate early start of the months, but just this is still owned by New Rockstars, and the amount of investment we put into this channel to make it great in the first 2 months, it's not profitable for me right now, and the one path that we could get to profitability, at least in the short term, is by you guys supporting these types of things. And I'm also, you'll notice I'm drinking coffee out of a deep dive mug here with the little Vossmanod on it. So forgive me if it feels like I'm plugging this stuff too much. All right, let's talk about Avengers Endgame. So, Avengers Endgame, obviously one of the top grossing films of all time. I believe it is currently at number two. Those numbers aren't like locked into my head. Why? Because it's constantly changing. Because they keep re-releasing these movies. But yeah, currently number one, Avatar. The first 2009 Avatar is the number one film ever released at like a lifetime gross of $2.9 billion. Avengers Endgame is at $2.79 billion worldwide lifetime. But Avatar: The Way of Water is coming up right behind it at $2.3 billion, followed by James Cameron's Titanic, $2.26 billion. Spider-Man: No Way Home, for the record, is at number 7 at $1.9 billion. Now, obviously, a movie's quality and its success is not just a factor of how much money it makes, but I think how much money it makes is a fair reflection of how much people consider it to be an important, essential viewing experience in a movie theater. So Avengers Endgame, we all kind of know the success story there, right? Avengers Endgame was the culmination of 10 years of Marvel films, scores of Marvel films, starting with, this guy, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man in 2008. And then really what Marvel did so successfully is they doubled down on this idea of in-universe continuity so that each movie felt like the chapter of a must-see TV series. So you couldn't just skip a title because they would have these little winks and these details that would reference each other and that would call things back. And people quickly realized by the end of phase one that these movies were going to be a more enriched viewing experience if you saw all of them. It had this amazing cumulative effect where everything built on top of itself, and it just made it, you felt like you were on the inside of an inside joke. And movies had never really done that before. I mean, we had franchises like, obviously, the James Bond 007 franchise that had a ton of installments that came out, but they didn't really connect to each other. They recast James Bond about 6 times at that point. No, it was Connery. We had Lazenby, we had Dalton, we had Roger Moore, we had Pierce Brosnan, and yeah, we had Daniel Craig, so that was 6. But yeah, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all the characters pretty much stayed the same. We had some minor recastings at the beginning, so it felt like we'd been living with these characters in our lives for 10 years, and that their stories stayed pretty much consistent. There were some weird hiccups along the way, but by the time we got to Avengers Infinity War, it felt like we were on a journey that had been going according to plan in a way that we felt satisfied by. So going into Avengers Endgame, this movie had a tall order. Avengers Infinity War was, I think, one of the biggest cliffhangers since arguably The Empire Strikes Back in terms of the franchise intensity around these characters and how big a deal it was. I wouldn't say that the snap was as big of a twist as Darth Vader revealing that he's Luke's father, but it did leave people in a state of panic and terrify people about what would be happening next. It wasn't just that Darth Vader revealed he was Luke's father, it was that Han got frozen in carbonite, and we didn't know what was going to happen in the third one. So going into Avengers Endgame, that year, I mean, just try to remember that year from the ending of Infinity War going into Endgame. It was a huge time for new rock stars. I mean, I think that's really when it put my role as a YouTuber on the map. Is I spent that year speculating like crazy, wondering what the title would be, how they could undo Thanos' snap, whether they would just have to live with this permanently, who would die on the other end of the fourth film. So Avengers Endgame had a very tall order, and it pulled it off majestically. Obviously it's a film, but it doesn't follow the same beats as every movie does. It's more of a cinematic experience that has these beautiful narrative moments of setup and payoff in a complex plot that hits us both logically and emotionally. the team behind this movie, directed by the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo, written by Eminem, Marcus and McFeely. These are the guys who had also written Captain America: Civil War. They wrote Winter Soldier. They wrote Infinity War. They had also done a pass on Thor: The Dark World. They had their hands on a lot of scripts, but they really figured out the kind of language and the logic of the MCU. And so with this movie, they really had a difficult task of figuring out how to continue to weave in all of these different characters, characters that have been defined by the fact that they don't share a screen together, and make it all make sense. And they totally pulled it off. I think Avengers Endgame, when you go back and look at it, is such a heroic story of people who are not having a good time. Like, right? Like, you think at any point any of these characters will die because it has a sense of finality to it. And they, like, so obviously beginning with Tony Stark and Nebula, a pairing that we never thought we'd see together, but it makes sense. The idea that the opening act gives us exactly the story that we would expect, a vengeance story against Thanos. This is what we had been predicting all year long. Why don't they just go find him? Can they use the stones again? And then they gut punch us by revealing that Thanos uses stones to destroy the stones, and Thor decapitates him, spraying Nebula with her father's blood, and it's just a heartbreaking scene leading us to this haunting reveal of 5 years later, which I think is the boldest choice of the film. It's not just 5 years later. I think we remember how devastating it was to see this on screen. I don't know. I think some of us predicted a time jump, but a 5-year time jump is just insane. Because they know most of the people watching this movie are at least, 7 or 8 years old, and they can remember vaguely at least how long of a time 5 years is, and how huge of a chunk of one's life that is. I think this is such a bold choice. It arguably broke the MCU from here forward, because no other title has known quite what to do with this. Sometimes they flirt with the idea of it. In Loki's case, they just extracted themselves from the timeline, which I think was the right move. But every other title is dealing with the fact that some people are 5 years older than the other, and most of them just don't acknowledge it. And since this hit us so hard, we are all begging for some Marvel title to acknowledge this. Because what a huge choice. I can't really blame these writers and screenwriters and filmmakers who have been making these projects since then, because how do you deal with it while still serving the narrative priorities of whatever story you're trying to tell? Whether it's Shang-Chi or Ms. Marvel or Eternals, they all kind of vaguely reference the events of Endgame, but they don't really deal with it. It's rare that we see what we call blip fiction. But in this moment, we're so excited to see a relatively post-apocalyptic New York, but we don't linger on this. Instead, we go to a group therapy session. This is bold screenwriting to challenge Marvel viewers who expect to see, like, the end of the world, and instead, we go to some place like this where we have to talk about our feelings. I think that's awesome. I think that's so cool. I just, we still do want to see what the world looked like during that time and how they survived, how they got through it. What other kind of consequences are there? Some titles have attempted to do this with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but not to the point to where we feel like we really know it. And I would say blip fiction is still a title that just needs to happen. You don't have to call it blip fiction. That's just my name for it. But seeing these characters who were left behind and how they got through the snap and how they got through that blip period. So I'm not going to go through the entire movie. We've seen the movie before. We know what is good about it. But the fact that Endgame was able to capitalize on this huge event, this huge question, this moment in the Marvel Comics of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline when Thanos snaps half of all life away, and actually deliver on it and figure out how they're going to undo it without following the comics beat for beat. The comics, bring in Adam Warlock. They're able to just kind of use the stones in a different way to reverse everything. We've seen some super chats come through here. Smokey the Bear, I appreciate you and everything you do. Hopefully will do. Thank you, Smokey. I appreciate that. I'm seeing if there's any other super chats that I missed here. Oh, got one. Do you think we will see MIB in Secret Wars? Oh, yeah. I mean, that'd be really fun, right? Just bring in ones that, like, other titles that you wouldn't necessarily see. I don't think so, but I'd love to. Just like a quick cameo in the background, maybe. Um, so with Avengers Endgame, they pulled off this complicated event. They used time travel, but they didn't make it a time travel movie. So they kept it limited to the second act, and they pulled off a pretty interesting time heist. The sequence where they're brainstorming the time heist, usually I can just kind of look at the where in the movie we are and kind of know. I've just gone through this movie so many times, and I know. Um, so yeah, as they're talking about the time heist, you kind of get a sense that we're watching on screen the Avengers go through what Marcus McFeely, Russo, and Feige and their VFX team all kind of went through to figure out how this movie would work, brainstorming where the stones were at different points in history. But in addition to all this, they come up with some pretty exciting fireworks in the midpoint of this movie where the Avengers do go on the time heist, where they're able to bring Cap back fighting his, variant version of Captain America, where he says Hail Hydra in the elevator. We get a recreation of the elevator. This moment where War Machine backhands Peter Quill while he's dancing to Come and Get Your Love. We get these parent-child moments with Tony and Howard Stark with Thor and his mother. Fascinating Dark World redemption, which just feels like the Marcus and McFeely saying, no, there was an interesting story to the Dark World. We promise, we promise. They made it a heroic story for Nebula, for Scott Lang, and for Clint Barton, people who were relatively sidelined in Infinity War. Some of them didn't appear in Infinity War. And they brought these characters together in a way that we didn't expect. Remember, Smart Hulk and Thick Thor were not in any of the marketing materials. So they're able to keep these secrets, two huge parts of this movie, under wraps. It was like a total marketing success. Let's see, Samuel Battenfield, thank you for your super chat. I'm finally making it to a Deep Dive Live. Yeah, we should just call it Deep Dive Live. That's a better name. Deep Dive Live. Wagenbach says hello from Scotland. Love your vids. Thank you for your super chat. So yeah, really, Avengers Endgame, I don't want to say benefited from, but they absolutely capitalized on the fact that this wasn't just a success of one singular film. It was, when we talk about whether Marvel can top Endgame, we're not talking about can it make a movie as good and as successful as Endgame. It's can Marvel make 10 years of movies that hit audiences the way Endgame did, which that's a more complicated question. I think we can all agree that Marvel can make a better movie than Avengers Endgame. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but that's certainly my opinion. I think Spider-Man No Way Home, on its own, as a singular film, was a more fun movie-going experience than Avengers Endgame was, which might be sacrilegious because obviously Avengers Endgame does so many things better than Spider-Man No Way Home does. But when we talk about what a 2 to 2.5 hour movie experience should be, I think Spider-Man No Way Home delivers on that and stands alone. I think Avengers Endgame, as a whole, as an experience, kind of works as the third act, as the finale to 10 years of storytelling. And totally works. But there are certain parts of Avengers Endgame where if you were to walk into that movie without knowing anything about the franchise up until that point, I think you would feel certain parts of it dragged. And I don't think a movie should require like prep, summer reading. I know that's been Marvel Studios' gamble as they've retrained audiences, and allowed YouTubers like me to exist to talk about their stuff, so that people do have this kind of like ongoing experience of summer reading and whatnot. But I think a truly great movie should not require such a background understanding of who these people are and where they're coming from. You should just be able to walk into it. And I think Spider-Man No Way Home did a slightly better job. Even if you didn't know who Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and these other villains were, I think you would understand that they were Spider-Men from another reality, and you know enough about Spider-Man's lore that they lose a parent and how devastating it is to lose a parental guardian figure and have other people, other yous from other lives who guide you through that grief. I think that's a powerful story, and I connected with it more. But I also just feel like before Avengers Endgame, Captain America, Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Infinity War, I think were better movies than Avengers Endgame were. So I do think Marvel can top Avengers Endgame, but again, we're not talking about a singular movie. We're talking about a 10-year journey that they would have to recreate. So what worked about that journey? Oh, okay, so we have a couple super chats. Eric, Billy Bug says, Eric, can you break down Disney's Wish trailer? If I have time for it, honestly, I'm I'll watch Wish. That's not really my bread and butter type content. My favorite thing about Wish, I saw like stuff for it at D23. I like this idea that the star in Wish is the singular star that every character in Disney movies has wished upon. I think that's a fascinating idea. They probably won't get as meta with it as I would love to see in a movie, but I think that's a fun idea. And then, yeah, I think we got another super chat here. Smokey the Bear. Can Marvel Disney shut down new Rockstars for the work it does with all the money and resources? I don't think Marvel can shut us down per se. But I will give you all a little insight. I think a lot of people think that YouTubers are like Disney shills. I think some YouTubers you might just be all the time pro Disney accounts. The reason is that there are like 6 to 7 major studios in Hollywood. You got Disney, you have Universal, Comcast, you have Warner, which is owned by AT&T, you have Paramount, which is owned by Viacom. That's the same company that owns CBS. You have Sony, and then you have other independent ones like, A24, which makes a lot of the Oscar buzz movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Of all these studios, really only Disney seems to be the one that is okay with YouTubers just going by the simple basic guidelines of fair use on social media. Fair use means that we're allowed to, under the First Amendment, comment upon, talk about, review, break down media that is owned by other entities, the way like these Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar movies are by Disney. But it has to be what is called transformative. And the legal threshold for transformative is you can't just play the clip back to the audience and claim that you created it and then profit from that. If you are commenting upon it, that is properly transformative. If we are breaking down the footage and pausing it every now and then and zooming in on it, that is considered transformative because really the content is the video essay analysis that we're doing. That's fair use. It's a basic thing, and Disney understands that it helps them to have people on social media talking about it, whether it's good or bad. And the people I know at Disney don't care if we give stuff negative reviews. They just don't want us to to engage in some toxic stuff like bootlegging or that kind of thing. So the other studios are not as kind about it. They violate the principles of fair use all the time. So sometimes we can't even make a video that talks about something that comes from Sony or Universal or Paramount. Paramount's especially mean about this to where that's why you don't see us talk about like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning a lot, because even if I do a trailer reaction to a Mission Impossible movie, Paramount will strike it. And not only will we lose money from it, we'll get like a copyright strike. So that's why we talk about Disney so much, is that Disney is the only one that is most consistently playing ball with us. Now, when it comes to music, that's a different story, because music is owned by a different division of the company, and music is harder to argue that you're transforming it, because you're just playing the clip, and just the way the algorithm works, they'll ding you if you play too long of a music clip. So we have to be careful how much we can get into music analysis, and sometimes that just means it gets demonetized, which means we can't profit from it. But like, when you're a business operation like New Rockstars is, if you can't profit from, if you can't just make ad revenue from it, really you're just giving away your time for free. And if I were just doing this as a hobbyist, that'd be one thing. But like this deep dive channel and the New Rockstars Network, there's a lot of people that we employ, and I don't want other people at the company to lose their jobs because I insist on analyzing things the way I want to analyze them. So that's why. But I think some of the other studios are getting more okay with playing ball, and we just have to be more careful. It's just more of a headache. We have to edit things that we talk about that come from Universal more. And come from Warner and Paramount and Sony more. We have to be more careful, and that headache makes it less likely for us to want to talk about it. So that's why. That's kind of the inside baseball of like why these channels talk more about Disney. It's because like it's the only way you can make a living doing it sometimes, and like it can be such a headache to spend all your time making a video about something, and then just some intern at Universal is like, no, we should get the money for all the hard work you made on it. Look, one thing I want to avoid doing too much, and I'm only doing this because it's a live stream and I was asked about it, is what I call clout pouting. It's my new term for when influencers are like, I was not invited to D23. How could they do this to me? Or my video was demonetized. Disney is censoring me. I'll never do a thumbnail about that crap because it's just like, if people ask you about it, spend whatever 6 minutes talking about it, but you don't need to make it everyone's drama and tea. Okay, but we're talking about Avengers Endgame here and what worked with Avengers Endgame, and I think Marvel can totally replicate this success. But right now, they are not on the trajectory to do so. And what do I mean by that? Avengers Endgame worked because Marvel had a certain brand consistency. Not everything that you saw in Marvel connected as well to each other, but by the time we got to Infinity War and Endgame, all of it was brought in. Nothing was really left behind. Even things like Thor: The Dark World that not everyone loved, they set a huge part of the second act of the movie in Thor: The Dark World, so it felt like it was all required viewing. And in order for Marvel to pull that off in a future crossover event like Kang Dynasty or Secret Wars or something beyond that, Phase 5 and Phase 6 are going to have to start nailing it and setting up all of these characters so that we love them as much as we love the original 6 Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy, and that they connect with each other on some kind of consistent plan, and that nothing feels like it is left behind. And that's a hard thing to do when you're doing releasing streaming series, because there's so much content coming out and so many B plots and side characters, and people fall in love with these B plots and side characters, but not all of them are essential to bring back in future films. So it doesn't feel like it has all that kind of consistent, AAA rating content. Some of it just feels like you can skip it. And already Marvel was testing the limits of that with Avengers Endgame, but they saw with Captain Marvel became a billion-dollar movie that they can pull it off. But I think they learned the wrong lessons from that. And they de-elevated or lowered the status of importance of some of the side stories that they're doing, and they felt that they could just tell lots of different stories, and I think that's great, but you're paying a price for it, and the price is people don't feel like the MCU is as essential to their lives as we did when we saw Avengers Endgame. And that's a challenge. It's not like a backbreaking thing, and maybe it's better for Marvel to be at a place where we don't need everything to come together in a climactic finale event story like Avengers Endgame. Because again, as I said, you can have amazing movies that don't follow the MCU Infinity Saga model. James Cameron has proved this multiple times. Even the first Avatar wasn't based on any kind of pre-existing lore. He invented a new world. Avatar: The Way of Water, the Avatar movies were not in our lives for most of the MCU's existence. And then suddenly comes back with A Way of Water and creates an essential viewing experience. Really, the success story I think we can all agree from 2022 was Top Gun: Maverick, a movie that people really just saw because of Tom Cruise. There was a moment on the red carpet in the past year where Steven Spielberg gave Tom Cruise a big hug and credited him with saving exhibition, saving the theatrical model. And an argument could be made that that's the case. Many directors have echoed this on Twitter that Tom Cruise single-handedly did, because he held Top Gun Maverick, a movie that could have released during COVID on a streaming platform, and Tom Cruise and the team behind Top Gun Maverick said absolutely not. And they waited, and they spent those couple years refining and perfecting it, doing another pass of editing until they had a really, really great movie. Although I'm told, because I have a family who's in the U.S. Navy and are Navy aviators, and I believe they saw a cut of the movie before COVID, and they said the movie didn't change really that much. So I think they just had a hit on their hands. One question we should ask is, should the MCU have ended with Avengers Endgame? Many of you are going to say absolutely not. But what I'm going to say is, should the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Infinity Saga, that version, that era of the characters, have ended with Endgame? Because I often look back at this and wonder, Loki, Wanda Maximoff could have been transitional heroes that take us from one universe to another. The early years of Phase 4, when we started with WandaVision and then we went into Loki was detached from any kind of timeline, and they watched the Infinity Saga on a screen in Loki, and that made me really excited, because I really felt like on the other side of it, Multiverse of Madness or Spider-Man No Way Home, these multiverse events might reset the landscape in a way that can really feel like a square one. Instead, Marvel has kind of pulled its punch there, and left us with many of the characters we know, and we're still relatively in the same universe that we were at the end of Avengers Endgame, but none of these writers and directors really know what to do with the blip. It was too big of an event, and it really should be the biggest event in any of these characters' lives, but they're talking about like high school shit. They're talking about can they get a bank loan? You know, and those are things that obviously matter to people, but not if you had 5 years of your life where half of the people you knew were erased from existence. It's just crazy to imagine the stakes of it, and that every story that should be the only conversation people have. We can't move on from the blip. That's crazy to imagine people moving on from the blip. That's why you think just set stories in the blip fiction or move it to another reality, move it to another universe. And I really think there could have been a path they could have taken where Loki and Wanda could have been characters that lead us into a new reset universe where we can recast some of these characters, we can reboot it, have a true 616. And at that point, I think we would all be okay calling it the 616 if it has Fantastic Four in it, if it has X-Men in it, if it has a Tony Stark in it, if it has a Black Panther in it, and it really looks like the 616 of the comics. Instead, we're calling something 616 that many people just do not identify as a complete Marvel universe. It's a good Marvel universe, one that's been really fun to live with, but it is a separate one. And so I know I now accept the fact that that's not the case, and that's fine, and we may not get that kind of reset until the other side of Avengers Secret Wars. But in the meantime, it feels like in order to have a climactic showdown as big as Avengers Endgame was in 2019, you're going to have to start doing some work fast. And I don't think, based on what I know about their future plans over the next few years, I don't know if they're going to hit that. Because we don't know who the Avengers are right now, and it doesn't have to be the Avengers. We need some kind of focal group of heroes. We don't have that in the MCU currently. We have Doctor Strange, we have Captain Marvel and the other Marvels, we have Peter Parker, and we have Hulk, we have She-Hulk. Really, Wong seems to be the biggest character in the MCU because he's the one that we all really love and adore. But we don't know what the focal lineup. The closest thing we got to the Avengers in Phase 4 was the post-credit scene of Shang-Chi, where it was Wong talking to Bruce Banner, Carol Danvers, and Shang-Chi, and Katie talking about the Ten Rings, summoning something that I think will end up being the beacon, the Kree tech that brings in the villains of the Marvel's film. But like, is that really the most exciting thing for Marvel viewers? You tell me. I don't think that's something that's going to get $2.79 billion of box office profit. Now, some would say that like that wasn't the job of those movies, that Loki did that, and that Avengers, or that Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania by unveiling the Kang Dynasty, that was the goal of that. But we're seeing right now with Marvel, if you put all this weight on one star, if that star goes through some kind of drama or legal troubles, you're screwed right now. I don't know if they're screwed. We're still waiting to see what's going on with Jonathan Majors and how that's all going to lay out. But like, you know, Disney must have like 5 different contingency plans for how they're going to move forward and what Marvel's going to do here. Let's talk about like, who do we think should direct Avengers Secret Wars? A lot of people go to the Russo brothers. The Russo brothers obviously created something great with Avengers Endgame and with Avengers Infinity War, Civil War, and Winter Soldier. And they've gone on to create other great things. You know, their production company, Agbo, is the reason we have Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think they obviously understand what makes a great film. But recently, Joe Russo also says he wants to see AI write movies. I don't agree with him there, but I still think they remain talented filmmakers. On my short list would be someone like Jon Favreau, although I'm not crazy about what Jon Favreau has been doing lately on The Mandalorian, but I really just think that he's distracted by other things. James Gunn would have been a good pick, but he's over at Warner Brothers overseeing the DC slate. I think Ryan Coogler and Destin Daniel Cretton are going to be options that Marvel looks at, especially Cretton because he is going to be directing Kang Dynasty, and depending on what he's going to be doing with that movie, I honestly think the best pick of directors of Secret Wars are the Daniels. A lot of you may think the Daniels are overrated, and they've only been proven from Everything Everywhere All at Once. But if they are kind of shepherded by the Russo brothers, I say bring in Agbo, the Russo brothers as executive producers, and the Daniels as directors. I think that team, with Marcus and McFeely perhaps, could make a really incredible Avengers Secret Wars story. But the issue is, and here's the risk with doing Avengers Secret Wars, what people are excited about for Secret Wars are things that I think Marvel should be worried about. People are excited for. People are excited to bring back franchise heroes from things that Marvel Studios had nothing to do with. Uh, like bringing back characters like Ben Affleck Daredevil, like Hugh Jackman Wolverine, like Patrick Stewart Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen Magneto, like characters from other franchises. Obviously, Kevin Feige had something to do with some of these castings. He was an associate producer on the first Fox X-Men, and I think that is going to be the direction they go. But if you get to the point where we have Avengers Secret Wars and no one cares about the main Marvel MCU heroes from Phase 4, Phase 5, and Phase 6, it's not going to feel successful as Avengers Endgame was. This was a climax and a send off to characters that we had spent 10 years of our lives with. And instead, if Avengers Secret Wars is only just a nostalgia party for a past era that makes us, that we like better than the people we've been living with, Avengers Secret Wars is not going to be as successful. It may still be a good movie. It's just not going to be the same kind of hit Avengers Endgame was. I still think they can pull it off. I just don't know if they need to. Again, we talked about Top Gun Maverick. We talked about the two Avatar movies. I think you can totally make a film that is essential viewing, that is not a cumulative climax based calling back a decade's worth of movies. That's just one way that Marvel has made $1 billion movie. You can make $1 billion movie by just making a beautifully well directed, well shot, well written, audience crowd pleasing experience with a big star. That's all you need. That's all you need. And I wonder if like Iron Man was released now. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. in 2008 was not the star that he was while he was in the MCU. But you can do another Iron Man movie with a different star, maybe even Tom Cruise, and I think that you'd get $1 billion movie. Like, there's lots of ways to success for $1 billion movie, and I don't think Marvel has to do it that way again. I think if you have a really good X-Men movie, a really good Fantastic Four movie, I think if you just make it essential, and if you make the stakes count, if you spend some time to really write it and shoot it well, you get a great director behind it. Yeah, these movies can do really well. I mean, look, James Cameron spends decades working on these Avatar movies. I don't think his success is replicable. He's kind of a unique visionary. I mean, but it's just crazy. I mean, they have John Watts who directed $1 billion movies and these Spider-Man movies. So what makes something $1 billion? Is it its interconnectivity? Is it its unique story? Is it just who the character is? I think you need a star at the center of it. And Spider-Man, whoever is playing him, is a star, and they had this success of bringing in Peter Parker, bridging him with the MCU, and somehow in that they got $1 billion movie. But not everything has to connect always. I have neglected Super Chat, so I'm going to quickly take some questions. Karun says, do you think MCU trailers give away too much now? Also, does looking for Easter eggs every time take away the surprise element for you in the theater? No, it doesn't. If a trailer is well edited, I'm not. I don't go into a movie being like, oh, I already saw enough. I sometimes am able to get a sense of what the movie will be from the trailers, but I think most of the time they don't give away too much. However, I think the final month of marketing, when they start releasing 30-second promos, if you go through those religiously the way I do, yeah, I think some of those trailers start to reveal too much. And there are some trailers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This is really the case for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that started just with like half-second clips, start to show huge parts of the movie. And I don't think at that point you need to do that to get people to go to the theater. I think at that point people will already make their decisions, and there's other ways that you can cut these promos that don't reveal so much. But in general, like the first 2 to 3 major trailers for a movie, the way Disney does them at least, don't reveal too much. There have been some exceptions to this rule. I think the trailer for 2016's Batman v Superman should not have revealed Wonder Woman in that shot, and should not have revealed Doomsday in that shot. I think that was a mistake. Oh boy, I think I have quite a few super chats. I'm sorry, everybody. I really appreciate all of you joining me in the stream right now. Fluffy says too much quantity over quality. Disney just needs to slow down and plan these shows and movies better. Yeah, I think Disney would agree with that too. Bob Iger definitely does. Robert Jackson says, why didn't Nebula tell Avengers about Vormir when they were going over the plan? Feels like Natasha could have had a warning or something. I don't know what your thoughts are, Eric. Yeah, talking about the logic of Avengers Endgame. When it comes to, to be fair, Nebula did call Vormir, what's it called? A dominion of death at the center of celestial existence or something like that. So she did warn them that this is like the worst assignment to get if you go there, but I think the Avengers all accepted that someone would have to draw that short straw. But, I mean, there's my question for the Time Heist brainstorm would be, why didn't they go to the Collector's Vault on Nowhere when both the Power Stone and the Reality Stone were there at the same time? The Collector's Vault is a fascinating setting that you could have had a great set piece in the middle of that movie. I think that might have come up, but they were like, well, there was no other point where two stones were in the same place at the same time. Not true. There was obviously on Earth during the Battle of New York, but there's also the Collector's Vault for a brief period of time where two different stones were there, and they could have grabbed them both. Eric Highland said, Phase 4 largely gets a bad rap. The role of Phase 4 is to deal with the aftermath of Endgame and set up the next big storyline. Phase 2's role is largely to the same, but doesn't get the same hate. Do you agree? Eric, I appreciate your comment. I don't know if I agree, though. They have said, Marvel has said the point of Phase 4 was to deal with the aftermath of Endgame, but why does that have to be the point of Phase 4? Why did that have to be the point of Phase 4? Why can't they just reset the universe and have a new universe and let that be the end of that story? Let Endgame be the end of that story and then branch into the multiverse and start a new universe that brings in elements of other things. I mean, they had time. They had COVID, like to just take a break and figure everything out. I think it's because Disney still needs to make money and they still need to pump these things out. I get the economics of it, but I don't think it's fair to compare Phase 4 to Phase 1 because by the end of Phase 1, we knew who the front lineup was, and we knew what the conflict was. We knew how they would be coming together in the Battle of New York, and then Avengers ended with Thanos smiling at us, so we knew that we're going to get some kind of Infinity Saga. How did we end Phase 4? In a state of confusion. We don't know who the lineup is. We understand that there's some kind of Kang threat on the horizon, but it's not clearly affecting every character in this universe. We don't know who the Avengers are. We don't really know what the front lineup team will be. Marvel's still dragging its feet casting the Fantastic Four. They seem to just be putting all their chips on Jonathan Majors and us being excited for him, and I think many still are, but obviously that's a big unknown currently. So yeah, I think it's okay to feel excited about Marvel. In general, I'm excited for Marvel too, especially now that we're having things like Fantastic Four. Daredevil is now back firmly in this universe. And that, we have other X-Men stories on the horizon. I think we can truly have the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it was intended to be in Phase 6 and beyond. But it's just right now, I get why everyone feels these growing pains. And I don't think it's fair to compare Phase 4 to Phase 1. It's just like, if they wanted to do a Phase 1 reset, they could have, and Marvel didn't. I think they got greedy and kept some of their characters and assumed that people would be as excited for these characters and the new characters they would introduce as they were about freaking Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, Mark Ruffalo, Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, and Jeremy Renner, and Samuel L. Jackson. And I would say the characters I've been most excited to see in Phase 4 have been like Agatha Harkness. I think Catherine Hahn has been a godsend. I think Wong has been great, even though Wong was established earlier. I think Shang-Chi, Simu Liu has been a lot of fun. But other than that, like, a lot of the characters they've introduced, like Iman Vellani, I think was incredible in Miss Marvel. I don't want people to be like, well, you didn't mention this, that means you hate them. They're just not coming to mind right now. I think Tiana Paris as Monica Rambeau has been a great casting choice. But I think in general, there's just been so much of it. And we just don't know if all of it is as important as the rest of it. Let's see. William says, I'm probably late on this, but we saw the impact of He Who Remains in Infinity War. When Doctor Strange looked at millions of possible outcomes, only one led to success. He Who Remains cut all the other timelines. I think that's a valid interpretation. I don't know if the Russo brothers were thinking of that when they devised that moment. But I think that is one way that we can look at, like, I think He Who Remains wanted Doctor Strange and the other Avengers to go on this particular path to defeat Thanos. Because we know there was that one line from Renslayer and Loki where she says, what the Avengers did was supposed to happen. And I think that's what that was referring to. Frey Girl says, I love the lore, but it's a lot to keep up with. Referring to the earlier conversation we had. I mean, I should have been keeping up with these super chats as we were going. But yeah. I think when we've surveyed most of our viewers here on the New Rockstars Network, surprisingly, many of them just don't read Marvel comics. And I think that's okay. I think most of us here are just fans of the MCU and fans of movies. And if that's your way into it, that's totally okay. And I think Marvel gets that overall, and that's why they've been successful. Karen's... Okay, yeah, so we're back to... I just want to make sure I got all the super chats. Okay, yeah. So we're back, and I'm just going to continue taking some super chats here. Yeah, but let me know in the comments, like, what Marvel title you're most excited to see. Which Marvel title do you think can be bigger than Endgame? Secret Wars, Avengers Kang Dynasty, a Fantastic Four movie, an X-Men movie? Airbrush Down and Dirty Trick says, thanks for all your work. I'm often as excited to watch your breakdowns as I am the movies. Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words in super chat. Bobby Dillon says, a hard reboot and the introduction of X-Men. Yeah, I think that's what it's going to take. I think we're going to have to get the X-Men in the mix for this to feel as essential. Okay. Yeah, so again, I have not seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I will be seeing that tonight. I'm super excited for that. I think that might be a more affecting film in terms of its payoff. Because, again, one thing Avengers Endgame did really well is they brought an end to Tony Stark's story and to Steve Rogers' story. And I think the ending of him and Peggy Carter dancing is a perfect ending for the film. Completely caught me by surprise. I think I had speculated that at some point. I didn't think they would actually do it, and they did. The way that they were able to use time travel in a way that mostly made sense. I think where it falls apart is some of the logic with the time travel in the epilogue of the movie. I don't think the writers and directors agreed on what the logic meant to have elderly Steve Rogers sitting on that bench at the end, because he didn't it just wasn't clear whether he was from this timeline, living in the background of this history, or coming from a branch timeline. But still, I think as we watch it, sitting in the theater, we love it, and I think there was a big oh my god when we saw that old Biden sitting on the bench. My favorite reaction, I've talked about this a few times, I think on this channel and in live events. I think my favorite reaction to Avengers Endgame is it was on my third or fourth viewing of it, and sitting in front of me at the ArcLight in Sherman Oaks was like a teenage kid and his dad. And the whole time, the kid was there super pumped. The dad was one of these guys I talked about who had never seen a Marvel movie before. So he walked in completely clueless as to what was going on. I don't even think he had seen Infinity War. So he was like kind of falling asleep during the movie, and the son kept elbowing him like, Dad, oh man, that's Captain Marvel. Oh, that's Peter Parker. He's back. Oh, he's hugging Tony. Oh, it's so great. And then the dad's just like, leave me alone. I don't know what this is. Wake me up when the movie's over. Until this scene. And then the dad stiffens up and he looks at that and he's like, so excited to see old Steve Rogers, and he leans over to his son and he goes, hey, that is Clint Eastwood. It's not Clint Eastwood, sir, but I stifled some laughter sitting behind this guy that he just looked at this guy and thought that this was Clint Eastwood, and that finally he could tell his son something that his son didn't know. My favorite movie reaction of all time. Other than a friend of mine who went to go see a Big Mama's house in Chicago, and it was just him and one other guy, and there's a scene where, Martin Lawrence is sneaking around the house, and the real Big Mama is walking around, and she comes home, and there's one guy by himself sitting in the front row that my friend saw, and when that happened, he goes, oh yeah, now there are two Big Mamas, which I think is second funniest reaction to a movie ever. Sam Heinrich says, is Chris Evans still interested in returning to the MCU? I think he was talking about this recently when he was interviewed for this Apple TV movie Ghosted, and I don't think he wants to return to the MCU until there's a story that needs him to come back, which kind of feels like, okay, well then Secret Wars. But yeah, I think missing Chris Evans is also part of the reason why people are just like feeling uncertain about the MCU right now. Nothing against Anthony Mackie. I think he's totally fine as Captain America, but like, why can't we just have both of these characters? Like, I would just like to have Chris Evans in retirement, even if he's an old man or in an alternate timeline doing his own thing. Like, there's, you know, we just don't have we miss these characters, and I think we need to recast them. We need a Tony Stark and a Steve Rogers in the 616. They don't need to be the main focal characters, but they can be like a Nick Fury doing spycraft shit in the background. Yeah, so I think that's a part of the reason people are worried that Endgame might have peaked. I don't think Endgame will be the peak. It wouldn't surprise me if one of these titles in the future becomes the number one most profitable film of all time. It's almost like inevitable, the IP that they'll have, and just because the audience wants it, and they're going to find a way to get to over $1 billion with these movies. I just don't think they're going to follow the same model that Endgame did, of like having 10 years of connecting stories that all kind of weave together and pay off in the way that Endgame did. Just not going to happen. Okay, I'm trying to think. Yeah, so I'm just going to take some other questions, but we're going to be closing out here. We've been talking long enough. Let's see. Disney Van says Erik Voss, Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame. I think Infinity War is a better movie than Avengers Endgame. Certain says, hey Eric, do you think the mutants could pop up after the cosmic radiation, which originally originated 2 times on Earth by snapping, would be a good idea? What's your opinion on the mutants' origins? At some point, I speculated that cosmic radiation was the origin of mutant kind in the MCU. That could still end up being the case. I think that cosmic radiation is what activates the mutant gene, but I think the mutant gene has more of a ancient genetic origin. I don't think the cosmic radiation implanted people with mutations. I think mutations are something that we've lived with and might have just been dormant in whoever possesses that gene, and that the cosmic radiation awakened it. So I think that was the case with Kamala Khan. She always had she was born with a mutant gene, but it wasn't until she put on the bangle and got that cosmic radiation that mutant gene was activated. And I think that formula is going to be similar for a lot of other characters who might have been born with a mutation, and that some other kind of effect brought that out in them. We'll see what happens in Volume 3. Again, I'm seeing it tonight. I could be totally wrong, but I just think it'd be really cool if they could establish that people with like a celestial bloodline, once they get activated with cosmic radiation, the genetic profile is now expressed. But we'll see. I keep hoping mutants will be explained, and all we really get is some characters just get called mutants, but they don't really explain the process in which they're mutants. K407A says, imagine 616 and 199 collide in an incursion and blend together to get the future MCU, to refer back to John Krasinski's quote in Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, totally agree. I think you're going to need some kind of multiverse event. I think if they treated 199, 999, and 616 as like what 1610 and 616 were in Secret Wars, I think that's the way to go. You don't have to number them the same way, but I think we just need separate installments and franchises coming together on a battle world map that is overseen. I guess the question is, should the big bad of that still be Kang? Should it be a different version of Kang? Should it be Doctor Doom, as it is in the comics Doctor Doom? For a while, it seemed like it was going to be Kang. I just think there is a contingency that Disney has where they might explore a different option now. We don't know. We're not really sure yet. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. Again, I appreciate all of you joining me for this conversation. Yeah, I went pretty harder on the MCU right now, but ultimately, I think Marvel can totally top Endgame. They have not done it yet, but they've done it in terms of quality. I think there have been plenty of movies that are better than Avengers Endgame. Just to kind of give you my current ranking, let's see. I think the best MCU movie, I go back and forth between Guardians of the Galaxy and Winter Soldier. Right now, I feel like Winter Soldier, maybe just because I'm looking at Steve Rogers. I think the third best story we got in the MCU is Loki. Season 1, I think, was an incredible story. And to me, that is the third best story. Followed by Iron Man. I think Iron Man's just almost a perfect film. Then Avengers Infinity War, then Spider-Man No Way Home, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I think Avengers Endgame is the 7th best movie. After that, things kind of like move around a bit, shift around based off of how I'm feeling any given time to time. But those stories are like gold standard in the top of my mind. Let's see. Sam asked, a little off topic, but where should Star Wars go? I talked to Hayden at Celebration. He said, I would love to do a live action Clone Wars. Thoughts? Oh, that's cool that you got to talk to Hayden at Clone Wars, or at Celebration. I think a live action Clone Wars would be interesting. I'm really excited for the plan that was announced at Celebration this year. I think having a future movie with Rey, especially if you team her up with whatever age Grogu is at that point, would be really fun. On the other side of Episode 9, I think the Filoni-verse movie of those three, I might be most excited for. Despite like my mixed feelings on this season of The Mandalorian, I think Ahsoka is going to be a really great show. And then James Mangold doing something at the origin of the Jedi. I think those three stories at three different points in history, I think it's just a really smart way to go. So yeah, I think that's where Star Wars should go. I want Star Wars to go back into making movies. As much as I've loved these live action shows, I think it's been really hard for them. They're getting into, I think it's really hard to do world building across multiple different streaming show titles. I think you can do that with movies a little bit better, and I think you could do that within one show, but it's hard to do that with multiple shows. And that's kind of what but I mean, they pulled it off. I mean, Bad Batch stuck the landing this past season in ways that I did not expect. Um, Okay. Thank you all again so much. If you want to support what we're doing here on the deep dive, really grabbing one of these Rocket Science 89P13 shirts is a way to go. I have mugs, I have water bottles. There are other. It's specifically from the deep dive collection. That helps us directly. But nerdriot.shop has a ton of awesome Guardians of the Galaxy designs. And yeah, my deep dive of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 will be coming tomorrow. And that video, I've been watching early cuts of it. It's going to be so good. So I hope you love it. And then, to give you guys a little sneak peek at what's coming to the deep dive in May, those of you who stuck around on this live stream, with May, I want to explore the theme of simulated reality and illusions. So the movies we're going to be looking at, currently working on a deep dive of the Wachowskis' 1999 Matrix. That movie will be coming out the first week of May. I'll be doing a live stream reaction to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 just to close out this Guardians rewatch. And then after that, we're going to be looking at movies like Christopher Nolan's Inception. We're going to be looking at Jordan Peele's Get Out. We're going to look at perhaps Fight Club. I'm thinking about Fight Club. And then at the end of the month, we're going to do a rewatch of the 2018 Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, because on June 2nd will be Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So we're going to do a rewatch of that. I think all these movies talk about what reality means and how important is a stable, fixed reality when one is exploring the self. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. You're definitely going to want to subscribe to the Deep Dive channel if you haven't already. Tell your friends to subscribe to this. It's been a really fun journey to go on all of this with you. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to the main New Rockstars channel and keep an eye out for some big announcements coming out from the main channel on New Rockstars. And support all of us with anything that you can find on nerdriot.shop. You can follow me at EA Voss. And that's it for this morning. Let me know your thoughts on Avengers Endgame and Avengers Infinity War. I love all you guys so much. And again, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 Deep Dive is coming to the channel tomorrow. So just keep an eye out for that. Love all you guys. Bye.